Hi, and welcome to this quick tool review. This time around we have a pair of items that are interrelated. One needs the other. So let's just jump right in. The first item is a vacuum chamber, and I opted for a smaller than, well, they make them up quite large. This is a 3-gallon version. It's pretty easy to get a hold of a 5-gallon version, but storage for me is a problem, so I opted for the smaller one. The design of this one's a little bit different. Most of them have the valves and everything mounted in the glass top lid, and I opted for one where they mount it in the side of the container, like so. I thought that would just make it easier and less obstruct my view. I'm not sure that it's the best design, but it's the one I decided to go with, at least for now. This isn't very expensive. This was around this was like 85 bucks for the 3-gallon. I think the 5-gallon is a bit more expensive at like 125. It's got a silicone seal around a 1/2 inch or larger thick piece of glass. It seems larger. I think it's 5/8. It's pretty thick. And this is the brand, and I'll put a link below to where I got it on Amazon if you're curious. It came with a filter when you're exhausting the item, and it comes with a hose as well, so that you can attach it to the side. It's a stainless steel kettle, essentially. It's thicker than normal, so it can resist the crushing force of the atmosphere. If you think about it, the atmosphere is around 14 pounds per square inch. And so there's a lot of force pressing in on this guy. If we want to do a quick calculation, it would be the circumference of this guy, which is pi d, so that's 3.14 times 10, call it 31.4 times height, which is another 10, is 310, and 314, I'm sorry. And anyways, 314 square inches times 14 pounds per square inch is around 4,396 pounds pressing all the way around this guy trying to crush it. So there's quite a bit of force. These much heavier gauge stainless steel than usual. It's welded along a seam here, and they actually did a pretty good job. I don't know that that would be a sterile seam. It actually is pretty good. It might not qualify. A lot of these are just extruded. They take a sheet and they heat it up and press it into a mold. But this is such thick material, they probably couldn't easily do that. So instead, they folded this around and then welded the bottom on. So that's kind of interesting design. I don't think I've seen that in a pot before. The valve assembly, it's an oil-filled pressure sensor. And in this case, it's measuring a vacuum, so a vacuum sensor. And all stainless steel fittings, which is really surprising. And there's an exhaust port and an inlet port so that you can let the vacuum in, sealing off the outside, and then lock your vacuum pump out and open it up to the outside atmosphere to let air back in. So pretty nicely done. The top seal is fairly thick silicone all the way around. It's just under an 1/8 inch. It sits here pretty flat. They say you've got to get it centered because, again, there's a lot of force on the top of that. That's pi r squared for area here. So again, we're talking 25 times 3 is 175. It's about 175 square inches here, that with 14 pounds on every one of those square inches. That's a lot of combined force. So that's why this is so thick. So far, my initial look at it is it's reasonably well made. The gauge is okay. It's very viscous oil in there. It's kind of interesting. This is a little bit loose. I'm going to need to tighten it up. Looks like they actually used even a nylon lock nut to tighten this, which is kind of nice, and just some plastic bushings around the outside, which is probably not the greatest design. So that's about it for this. I'll let you know how it works in just a minute because I think we'll give it a test. So I'm going to put the exhaust valve on there, hook the hose up, and we'll move right along. So the second tool is the one that supports the first. As I said, they were related. So I picked up a vacuum pump. This is a very interesting vacuum pump. It is probably a similar grade to other moderately low-end models. It's not inexpensive. It was about $500 for this 9 cubic foot in a minute version. They have 7, 9, and 12 cubic feet a minute, if I remember right, or maybe it's 6, 9, and 12. In any case, yeah, this guy wasn't terribly inexpensive, but one of the advantages of it, it's got a touch screen that monitors the vacuum pressure and can show you a trend. Among other things, it can show you a leak. If you're an air conditioning guy, it can be really handy because besides seeing the vacuum approach the range you want, you can then let it sit there for a while with the pump off and watch to see if the vacuum goes away and see if you got a leak in the system. It also can send to your Bluetooth phone, so you can go and grab a, soda or something while you're waiting. In anyways, let's open this guy up and see how good it is, because I don't know. I've heard other people talk about it, but let's see if we can pop it out of the package here. Pop the lid on this guy, and it comes with 2 containers of high vacuum pump oil. Although, should let you know up front that this does not actually reach a high vacuum. I think it reaches a medium vacuum, something like. I'm gonna have to go look that up. I think if I remember right, it reaches 15 microns, which does not qualify it as a high vacuum. It's 7, 9, and 12 cubic feet a minute, and 15 micron is the vacuum limit on it. And I believe you've got to be below 1 micron, something like that. Maybe it's below half a micron to be a high vacuum. So it's close, but no cigar. Nice packaging. This is very expensive foam rather than the that stuff that generates so much static. This stuff is really useful foam. I love packaging stuff in this. So that's an excellent shipping container. And it's got the oil catcher on the output here that you can put on after. Boy, they really did an excellent job shipping it with the shipping packaging. It's double thick cardboard and stapled in the corners, so not just glued. That's pretty nice. And they sealed in plastic, I guess, to keep any oil inside. It does look like there's a residue of oil throughout this thing, which is interesting because it's shipped empty, but they probably tested in the factory and a little residue. But it also stops corrosion, which is kind of nice. All right, let's see if I can get this guy out of here. All right, so here's the pump and the oil catcher, or what do they call it? The diffuser, the exhaust cap. Its job is mostly to keep the oil, because apparently when there's still a lot of air in the system, you will wait, a bunch of oil will come out of the system until it starts approaching a medium vacuum, and then less and less oil will come out. So you do have to keep your eye on the oil level, because it will run out, and then you could damage the pump and it won't function properly. See if we can get this oily bag off of here. Boy, not kidding about the amount of lube everywhere. That's probably why they don't ship these full, because it'll all leak out. But yeah, it's well lubed in here. It's got a film on everything. So if you look at the sight glass, there is a little bit of oil left in there. So clearly they tested it in the factory and drained it, but some is still left in there. So there's an oil drain hole with the sight glass on the bottom here. So an oil drain hole here and the sight glass. This plug here covers up where the exhaust is supposed to go. Oh, it looks like it threads in. That's kind of interesting. It's all plastic. As a matter of fact, I'm going to clean some of this flashing off the plastic here from the molding process, just to leave it a clear path so that the whole thing can be used equally. Alrighty, so I'm going to thread this guy onto here. And then before you use it, it says take off the exhaust cap. So I guess this is stored to prevent dust from getting back in. That's pretty interesting. This actually has a gasket on it. So I wonder if you're supposed to seal it. Looks like this is the fill plug, which is a little close to the display assembly here. That's not ideal. So the pump holds 22 ounces of number 45 oil, whatever that ends up being. I'm going to have to look that up online. So they do give you a little bit extra. It leaves you about 4 ounces extra. Right now I'm just up to max, so that's good. Here's where the air inlet is, and it's got a gasket on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let the vacuum pump just charge the sensor area and not bother hooking up to anything else, just for a start. Power switch is back here, and power comes on, and the display comes up. It says click anywhere. There we go. So let's see. Oh, by the way, it says do not suck atmospheric pressure for more than 3 minutes on it as a warning. On top of that, it says do not ever exceed 27.5 bar on the input, or you'll damage the sensor. I'm not sure exactly what 27.5 bar translates to. So just measuring while it's not running, the motor's at 80 Celsius, oil temperature's at 80 Celsius, which is room temperature. And the pressure is at no measure whatsoever. Let's see, we could just run this guy. Well, there goes the pressure down. A little disconcerting first start, probably because it starts dry. So the motor has a fan on it, which you feel cooling going across the whole interface here. For the various measurements, you can have it in microns, torr, millitorr, millibar, pascals, inches of mercury, and kilopascals. And the temperature can be in Fahrenheit or Celsius. Now, if I leave it right here, you can see there's got to be a leak somewhere because the pressure is coming back up. That's very interesting. So not a good seal there. Some of these things are a little loose, like this is a little bit loose, but maybe it rotates on purpose. So let's go back to the main menu. So how do you go back to the main menu? Oh, home, there you go. So let's go to settings and let's go inches of mercury. That would be a common US standard, and Fahrenheit. Microns is also another one. We know that it goes to 15 microns supposedly, so let's see. Minimum vacuum 15 micron, logging interval 1 second. It looks like it only goes up from there. And time, oh, you can set the day and date. There's also a Bluetooth app that you can connect this guy to. Holding time 0 minutes, flow rate 9 cubic feet a minute. Also supports multiple languages. And here's the graph, so go back to measure. Oh, it's already, well, that's interesting. It's supposed to get to 15 microns, but it went straight to 4. I think we need a larger container to try and drop down to a vacuum. So maybe we'll get the vacuum pot over here and try that. Oh, look at that leak. There's definitely a leak somewhere. All right, so we have the system hooked up. I've got the vacuum valve open, the output valve closed to read atmospheric pressure on this gauge. There it is at 0. I've got this centered more or less over here. And let's get this guy started. And you see it exhausting? That is normal. And that's why you need to replace the vacuum oil after it starts. So I needed to press down on the lid. It was leaking around the edges. And we are rapidly getting down. So you can see why you need to replace the oil. You also should do this well ventilated. It's not terribly quiet. As it gets more and more closer to a perfect vacuum, or the best it can do, the amount of oil that's coming out goes way down. Gauge over here has maxed out. It's not terribly accurate. The lid is definitely stuck. So I got to remember, you got to push down on it to make the seal initially. You can see the pressure there on the graph. And I am kind of curious how bad the leaks are in this system. Whether it was just this cap that was leaky or something else. Let's go back to the other menu. Nope, there is a leak here somewhere. It's slow. So it might have been shipped with a couple loose connections. So it's slowing way down for a very good reason here, is because as you get closer to a perfect vacuum, the molecules spread out in space. And so they need to go all the way from this container through this very tiny hose over to the vacuum pump to be drawn out of the system. So with this tiny hose here, everything slows down because the odds, as things expand slowly, of an individual molecule making its way down this pipe becomes less and less likely at any period of time as you go. So that's why vacuum pumps take a long time. This is called a rough or roughing vacuum pump. Plenty good enough for air conditioning, but if you wanted to do some work on like plasmas or something, like plasma deposition, this would only be a roughing pump. And then what you need is a turbo molecular pump. And what that one does is it actually spins really fast and tries to get molecules that are bouncing around to run into the blade and be forced down to where they can be picked up. Or besides the turbo molecular, they have the boiling oil style where the oil goes up and gets condensed, but when it goes up, molecules that are bouncing around can get stuck in the oil, diffuse in the oil, and then as it condenses, it drops back down to the sump where it can be pulled out by the roughing vacuum pump. So it does slow way down as you approach a finer vacuum. And you can see there where I stopped the pump, the pressure went back up. It is continuing down, and unfortunately the last part takes the longest. This is a 1/4 SAE fitting, and I just hand tightened it. Well, that didn't help, so there was a leak here. So now I used a wrench to tighten it and got an improvement. So now it says there's no leak. It actually tells you whether it thinks there's a leak or not. The motor is slowly getting warm. Okay, so I'm going to turn this guy off. For this test, we're going to take some 5-minute epoxy from JB Weld here. And we're going to use the self-mixing tip on it, which I normally don't use because you waste a ton of epoxy in the tip. I'm going to fill up 2 containers, and we're not going to mix any more than just this. Before I forget, I should probably put this in here in case it overflows so it won't get all over the container. So we're just going to squirt half of it in this container and the other half in the other container, except I need to cut this off so I can see how much is in it, actually in here. And this is 5-minute epoxy, so we're going to have to go sort of quickly. The goal is to see how many bubbles get left in it. Now, one thing I have to be careful about is when you're pumping this down, it can overflow the cup. So you can see, hopefully, there are plenty of bubbles in there. And we're going to open the vacuum valve, and we're going to start the pump. We're going to compare that to the epoxy I don't do that to. I suspect that the epoxy would actually be stronger too without the bubbles in it, because the bubbles are going to create voids in the epoxy, so it probably makes it weaker. I'd like to do a strength test as well. Now, if I let air back in the thing, the bubbles will collapse more rapidly. So I'm going to let some air in. So that's the first time we sucked air out. Let's try it again here. So you might want slower cure epoxy because this is going to end up curing before I get all the air out of it. It might have been a problem this way. I think I put an epoxy foam in there. Unfortunately, the epoxy cured. It's really warm. Holy cow. So that was a fail. You got to use longer cure time epoxy so that it gets a chance to degas before curing, because boy, does it get hot. Going for round 2, I'm going to try this JB weld. Unfortunately, all of the non-fast cure epoxy I have is steel reinforced, so it's probably not going to be clear, which is unfortunate. All right, so we're going to take one of these, put it in here, and I think I'm going to go back to putting this in there. This takes 4 to 6 hours to cure. I mean to set, and then in 24 hours to cure. So even though it's going to heat up significantly, maybe it'll work out okay in here. I'm not entirely sure, but we're going to give it a shot. All right. Well, I could reach in there and stir it while it was like this. I could have it sit flat. So for a second, I'm going to take the tank up and I'm going to put it on the pump, which vibrates a lot, and maybe that'll help settle this. Oh yeah, that's making it, so the pump can act as a vibration table for the epoxy as well, and maybe help some of those bubbles pop sooner, because it's definitely working. But I haven't gotten it to lie a lot flatter. So comparing that to this looks like there's hardly any air bubbles in it, but they're all microscopic. This has some lots of macroscopic ones in. I wonder if it's going to settle down, or unfortunately it's cured too much because it got hot. I don't know the answer to that. Well, here's the 2 epoxy containers. One that was left out on the right, one that was degassed on the left. The one that's degassed still has some bubbles left in it, didn't relax all the way. This one looks pretty smooth. It makes me wonder if there's some volatile compounds in the epoxy that come out when you lower the lower the pressure, surrounding pressure, and then cause it to evaporate. I'm not entirely sure. They both cured completely and are pretty hard. Pretty bizarre, huh? There's probably more to it to gassing epoxy, or maybe you have to use special versions of the epoxy. Here's a close-up of the 2. Took them out of the container. The side profiles look pretty similar. This one's degassed. This one is not degassed. Yeah, I'm thinking there's something volatile in the epoxy. I'll have to test that out at some point. For now, it's going to remain a mystery. That's pretty weird. Last but not least, let's try the Bluetooth app. So here's the Elitech app I downloaded off the Play Store. They require location, which is really weird because I can't imagine they really need location. And there we are, connecting to the device. So now you can get a graph right on your phone to see what the progress is like, including oil temperature, case temperature, leakage, extraction status. You can export the data, which is pretty nice. You can set settings on it, like micron, Fahrenheit, that sort of thing. Set the vacuum minimum, which actually lets it set at 8, which is kind of interesting. I don't think it'll actually reach there. That's pretty impressive. And so the app works just like the front panel, except it's remoted, which I think is a pretty handy feature, especially if you're an air conditioning guy. You can go do some other work while this thing's working and double check on it while you're, some distance away. That's pretty handy. It looks like you could even start the pump. Yeah, you can. So you can start and stop the pump too remotely. That's pretty neat. Pretty impressive. Overall, I think this is a very nice vacuum pump. Only time will tell how well it lasts. When it first started, there was a pretty harsh sounding start on it, probably because there was minimal oil in it, and then after it ran for a couple seconds, it sounded better. It's not a quiet pump, and it has a substantial amount of vibration. It has anti-vibration feet on it, but that's still not enough. You saw my camera vibrating while we're shooting this because it's vibrating the entire bench it's on. The camera's mounted to the bench. I'm going to need to come up with another solution because I've had this problem before. So we're going to have to find some other place to mount the camera. We'll figure that one out. But in the meantime, I think it's a pretty nice device. Whether it's worth the extra couple $100 for all the interface and whether this pump is actually better built than some of the couple $100 ones, I'm not sure. Time will again tell, and I'm not an expert. I have some other uses for this, so we'll try that out in the future. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Hope you find it useful. Hope to see you next time.